Conscience rests effectively at our moral center. Stand-up comedy memories. Lily Tomlin. Wouldn't it be great if we could pair up all the people who walked around the sidewalks of New York City talking to themselves, so at least it would look like they're having a conversation? Stephen Wright. Do you ever wonder what the most important organ in the body is? I think it's the brain. But then I think, what's making me think that? A lot goes on in the amazing organ inside our head, the brain. With all the things we're learning now from neuroscience and other disciplines, absolutely mind-boggling the mind is. Fascinating. And one of the things that most grabs my imagination is how the brain allows us to talk to ourselves. Like many things about being human beings, the experience of internal dialogue varies along a spectrum. Some people, which I was astounded to learn, report virtually zero internal dialogue, very minimal. Some report quite a lot. Most people do not hear their internal dialogue as an audible voice. But again, I was fascinated to learn that there's a minority of people who actually hear voice in their head talking to themselves. And I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. The overwhelming majority of us recognize and understand this kind of voice in our head to be ourselves, talking to ourselves or thinking, dealing with our thoughts and our emotions and what's happening to us. And it doesn't cause us much undue anxiety or inhibit our ability to function. But a small percentage of people experience this internal dialogue as actually coming from outside themselves and not self-generated. That's going to be scary. Most people experience their internal dialogue as like the middle chair, the middle bed, and the middle porridge in Goldilocks. It's just right. Some people can't shut off the internal dialogue or have periods when they can't shut it off. And it revs into overdrive, perseverating and ruminating. And some people experience, I was fascinated to learn, no inner dialogue at all. Very rare, but it happens. In his book, Chatter, The Voice in Our Head, Why It Matters and How to Harness It, Ethan Kross tells the story of Jill Bolt Taylor, who had a stroke at age 37, a medical professional. And the voice in her head went silent. She wasn't alone with her thoughts, he writes. She had no thoughts. In between periods where people were reacting, talking to her, or she was doing, the crossword puzzle or whatever, she'd be blank inside, and it freaked her out. I mean, it would freak me out. Eerie. Ethan Kross's work is fascinating, and it's based on a lot of clinical studies and research. And he talks about a lot of the things scientists have learned about our internal dialogue and how it affects us positively and negatively. Some of the interesting things I learned was that the same area of our brain is working when we feel emotional pain that lights up on the MRI when we feel physical pain. If you've got emotional pain, it actually hurts. It hurts. And I think for a long time in human history, we dismissed that. And we now know it hurts the same way. I found that fascinating. It hurts because it hurts. Most people talk more to themselves and have increased internal dialogue in the aftermath of negative experiences versus positive ones. Negative experiences also cause people to talk to others about their experiences more than positive experiences do. Talking to others about negative experience helps us because it helps us create some distance between us and what happened to us. It helps us do something they found is very valuable, take a step back for some perspective. That can be really hard when something horribly difficult happens to us. Interestingly enough, the research also shows that too much information is a real thing. That talking to others too much then begins to reinforce negative experience and sends us into that place where it's hard to break out of, going over and over the negative. A Belgian psychologist named Bernard Rhyme found that this was true, all this stuff, across all kinds of demographics: age, race, religion, education, and across different cultures. I found that fascinating. And talking about negative experiences and processing them through talking is something virtually all of us do, except, and Brene Brown would love this part, when the experiences involve shame. And then it's incredibly difficult to talk about. So all these kinds of things are starting, I don't know, as I learned some about this, piece together, right? Little bit you heard here, there, all that stuff. Those who end up oversharing negative experiences can alienate listeners who are trying to be sympathetic, which then increases their negative feelings. And that's a cycle that people get into quite often. Well, sharing what's going on inside us gets empathy from others, and that's valuable to a point. And that to the point I found fascinating, because it can then be a little difficult. But sharing initially is how we process in community. That it takes literally a tribe, a village, a group to help us deal and cope with stuff that happens to us. And all this holds true, but not for sharing online, where it does not hold true, the studies show. And they found that the main reason, what they think so far in their studies is the main reason, is that online communication misses the look in your eye, the body language, the sighing, all the other ways we communicate that are missing in that element. They found that video talking is the same as talking in person for most of this stuff, which I thought was fascinating as well. And there are many concrete things we can do to improve our ability to have our self-talk benefit us, to coach ourselves. And there are things we can do that aren't so good. The most important thing we can do, and what we learned the sympathetic listener can do, is do things that help ourselves create distance. Can we step back on the balcony and look at what's happened to us from a little bit broader perspective? Can we keep in mind that other human beings have experienced what we experience and feel what we feel, that we really are not alone? All of this internal dialogue stuff is really important because, as our time for all ages showed us today, our internal dialogue, our self-talk, has a lot of influence on our self-esteem. And self-esteem is a really important quality because it makes it possible for us to form a good conscience and follow it. It allows what happens to us to inform who we are and how we learn to be that person. And it helps us decide what kind of not only person we want to be, but what kind of community and world we want to live in. And self-esteem is not just a basic good. Many ethicists now consider self-esteem to be a cardinal virtue, a human personality trait so important that it is cardinal. The other virtues hinge on and relate to it, depend on it. And some of the other cardinal virtues, justice, loyalty, right? Courage. You know, putting something in a cardinal virtue place for an ethicist is pretty significant. That self-esteem has now crept into that. And yet, even though self-esteem is so important for our own self-worth, our own mental and emotional health, and forming a conscience, lots of us have issues with self-esteem in one way or another. All of us. It's something we always work on. When I taught high school ethics, I always began the year with a unit on self-esteem. Because if we are going to study right and wrong and good and evil, who is thinking about the right and wrong and the good and evil is important to get into that discussion first. Who you are and who you're bringing to the decisions you have to make and the things you encounter and the dilemmas you might face, that's going to have an important part to play in what those outcomes are, or your ability to act and think and decide differently. The emotional makeup of our self-esteem matters because it does influence our ability to think and reason and feel and bring our best self to things, especially to complicated, difficult decisions, situations, and choices we have to make. Self-esteem is not just feeling good about yourself. Self-esteem is having an accurate view of yourself that doesn't make you feel bad about yourself. There's a difference, right? Self-esteem strikes the mean, like most virtues do, between self-loathing and self-aggrandizement. Between, I'm always horrible, and I'm the best. I got the best words. Nobody has better words than me.
Good impression.
And self-esteem makes many things possible that aren't possible if your self-esteem isn't healthy. One of those is humility, and another is conscience. Humility, like self-esteem, strikes a mean. It's the middle ground between pride and self-pity. Many people consider humility inaccurately. Humility is not self-abasement, self-neglect, self-diminishment, always putting others first. That's not humility. Humility is the ability to accept yourself as you are and determine accurately whether what others say about you is so. My ethics professor in seminary was one James F. Keenan, who we heard from in the reading today. And he used an example when he taught high school ethics that I tended to use always with my high school ethics classes. He asked his students what the humble response is. And he would give them situations appropriate to high school students. He's like, you just played a great game. And your friend comes up to you and says, that was an amazing performance. You are outstanding. That was fabulous. What's your humble response to that? Thank you is the humble response. It's amazing how many people miss that. You always hear a lot when you ask this question, oh, I'm not really that good. Oh, the team was really good. I was just part of a really good team that day. Those are lies. You actually were really good. It's okay to say thank you. It's not okay to go, yeah, that's right. It's all me, baby. That's pride. But oh, I'm not really that good, that's self-loathing. That's not humility. Humility is thanks. It doesn't mean you're the emperor of the world or the greatest, competitor ever. But it acknowledges you did something good. Great. Now let's go on to the next thing and feel good about yourself. Thank you is a humble response. A lot of people have trouble accepting compliments. A lot of people offer false humility in response to compliments. There are people who think way too much of themselves and are too proud, but there are a lot of us who don't think enough of ourselves. A lot of us who are not able in the moment sometimes to just say, thank you. Self-talk and our internal dialogue are really important. Can you step back, say, all right, step back. Struck out 24 or 27 batters. Nobody got a hit. I walked one. Yeah, I did pretty good today. That was good. Yeah, thanks. Right? Only people who are able to create a little distance from experience, able to assess and name feelings, able to be present to themselves and what they're involved in, can start to practice the humility required. So you need self-esteem for that. And having an accurate sense of yourself, self-esteem and humility is important for conscience. Because if you don't have an accurate view of who you are, whatever you form as your conscience is going to be off base. It only stands to reason, right? In order to have healthy self-esteem and positive self-talk, we need to find our center, which is what we work on this month, and being able to operate from our kind of personal, emotional, and value center, because that's where our decisions about right and wrong, good and evil come in. Especially when faced with new challenges and new choices. Because in things we've always done before, it's easy or easier. But when something new happens, that's a little more difficult. That's when we need the conscience and the self-esteem. Like self-esteem and humility, a lot of people misunderstand what conscience is. Some people, including many Christian theologies, think of conscience as the voice of God living in us. I know that's what the Catholics think, because I used to teach Catholic theology in the same high school where I was teaching ethics. Which is okay, I suppose, but it's not really adequate completely, not for everybody. People who don't believe in God have a conscience. If there turns out to be no God, we still have a conscience. Still there, still operates. The conscience is real enough. Does there need to be deity in order to have one? I don't think so. Some people think conscience is your superego, but it's not your superego either. Superego is a psychological term for that internal parent, right? And there's some good stuff about that. Washing your hands before eating. Look both ways before you cross the street. Don't touch a hot stove. Flush after you use the toilet. All good things. All right to do, not your conscience. At best, it goes into part of forming your conscience. Some of those automatic responses that are in there to help form you. Some people, especially it seems lately, have come to equate their own personal opinion with their conscience. That's really difficult. Because while everyone is entitled to their opinion, you're not entitled to your own facts or reality, right? And often we hear this invoked, that people are holding to their conscience. And when they say that, it's actually a violation of the concept of conscience, because you violate a well-formed conscience to argue about the inferiority of other people or other religions or political opinions and say, well, it's my conscience. It's your conscience that some human beings are inferior? That's not a conscience. That's an ill-considered, malformed opinion. Conscience is something we build. We build it through internal dialogue, learning, experience. The superego gets in there a little bit, but it's not the same thing. Our most important core values, which help center us and steer us towards love and care and concern and kindness and fair play. We form conscience through our lifetime of experience, and perhaps not so much the voice of God exactly, but maybe the wisdom of all the great thinkers through the ages. Our mentors. And yes, religious teachers and teachings, they can certainly help form your conscience. Some of them are good ideas. You know, a lot of traditions teach love your neighbor as yourself. Gee, if everyone could just do that, we'd be a lot better off overnight. Conscience is how we see ourselves, what happens to us, what we do, and the choices we make. Through exercising, and this is a whole other sermon, what some people consider the gifts of love, compassion, kindness, hope. And I would throw in there a sense of fair play, justice. If the moral life is to ask, who am I, who ought I to be, and how do I become that person, self-esteem is important for the first question. The virtues and your values are important for the second. And conscience is important for the third, especially in terms of figuring out how we should act in novel and complex situations. Conscience rests effectively at our moral center. It's the place where all the questions about what kind of person we want to be and how to be that person and how to live well in the world must pass through as the gatekeeper. It is not something like anything to do with good and evil you can always set in stone. Right? Sometimes in good conscience, I can lie. When the Nazis come asking for my Jewish grandmother who's hiding in the basement, and I say, haven't seen her in ages. I just did the right thing. Right? Our conscience is so central that even entities that seem super strict, like the Catholic Church, for example, says that violating your conscience is not acceptable. You must follow your conscience even if it disagrees with the teachings of the church. They don't broadcast that one, but it's in the catechism. I know it's in the catechism because I had to teach it for a living for 8 years.
Internal forum decision.
Uh-huh. Right? So that's how central conscience is, because this is where all the things that make us up, right, come together, where we put things in our little justice and okay and kindness scales and figure them out. The conscience, in a sense, is a way to think of our best self. It's the best person we can be speaking as that inner dialogue. All the tips and tricks for creating more positive self-talk work for building self-esteem and formatting your conscience. How you talk to yourself is important, because that can affect your self-esteem, which is important, which can affect your conscience, which is central. Who we are matters. Who we feel we ought to be matters. How we become that person, what we do to become that person matters. Our words matter. Our actions matter. Not only because what we are and who we are and what we do and say has the power to hurt or heal ourselves and others, or to help or hinder ourselves or others, or to celebrate or condemn ourselves or others, or to include or exclude ourselves or others, or to make peace or war with ourselves or others. The vital importance of the reality of conscience gets made all too clear to us day to day. Just yesterday, we gathered for Emily Kolick's memorial service in this room. Emily took her life because she was a trans woman and was having difficulty dealing with transphobia she experienced. People who had an ill-formed conscience communicated an awful lot of wrong things to Emily through her life. If your conscience is well formed, you don't become the kind of person who makes other people feel wrong or inferior for any reason. Every day we see the importance of learning how to manage our self-talk, be it in shootings in schools, adults throwing temper tantrums on the floor of the United States House of Representatives because they can't have their own way. People who hate others learn how to hate. It is something taught, it's picked up from the behavior of those around them. The self-talk of people who hate is hateful. Hurt people hurt other people. Their consciences are ill-formed. There is no internal voice speaking to them of kindness, compassion, inclusion, love, acceptance, fair play. This is why and how people hate and hurt. People who create loving community learn how to do this. They form strong consciences. And they learn to form strong consciences from loving caregivers, competent teachers, well-formed in conscience family and friends who reinforce kindness and compassion and inclusion and fair play, self-esteem, self-acceptance, and humility, and responsibly try to be their best selves and teach others the importance of trying to be your best self all the time. We're all going to fail at it. But there are many ethicists who I agree with who would say it's the striving to do what's right that makes you good. It may seem overly simplistic to suggest that how you form your conscience and how you talk to yourself and how you tend to your self-esteem and your self-talk and how you help others do this has a major, great effect on the world with all its myriad complex problems. But that's just it. All of the world's problems in all their complexity stem from a root cause, a lack of love. Lack of conscience, the inability to harness the best self from as best you can from whatever cards life has dealt you. One of the functions of a faith community is to help us form and live by the healthy conscience. And so that's what we do here. We center our values. We center love. We center kindness. We center compassion. We center fair play. We center inclusion. When we do this, we practice what we claim to be and thus become it. Loving community. Thanks a lot for watching this video. It would help me out a great deal if you liked the video to give it a big thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, share this video with others, maybe ring that notification bell so you can be informed when we put out other videos like this. Check out my website and blog at tonylorenzen.com for even more resources that will open your mind, touch your heart, and inspire your spirit.